Hey everyone, welcome to Birth. I'm Ash. I want to introduce you to Jessyca. She is a yoga instructor and works with Gong Sound Healing, which is really fascinating. She tells the story of her mother, she tells the story of becoming a mother, and even the story of pain she suffered as a mother. But through all of that, through physical injury, through exploring her relationships and herself, she came to yoga and eventually the gong. And she explains not only the experience that she has had, but she breaks down some of the technical parts of teaching it and guiding people through it. So listen into our conversation and learn just what makes gong sound healing so unique.
I am curious about your background. How do you get, because I mean, you're a very passionate person about how you apply this practice and teaching and everything that you kind of put your hands to. So how do you get to this place? Where do you come from? You mentioned before we started recording about growing up Catholic. Kind of just, how do you get here?
I grew up in Washington, D.C. I had a really fun and interesting and I think very academic childhood. I was an only child. My mom was a single mom and she had quite a powerful job. So we did get to have some pretty cool experiences. I lived with my mom and my grandma. So it was a really fierce, like female upbringing, powerful upbringing. My mom was quite liberal and young. So and I was just recently thinking about this week, how my mom had a real gift to, my mom's quite humble and to always sort of understand maybe where she had shortcomings as either a parent or an individual and really provide me with a compliment to that. So I think that's why Catholic school was a decision for her. We had horses and she was thrown from a horse at about 26 and broke her back and had to have her spinal column replaced. To date, so this is now like 35 years ago, every single disc in her back is ruptured or removed or herniated. So she can barely walk. She's only 60. And she's been in a really bad physical state since she was 26. So that is definitely, a piece of the story for me, because I think just being able to move my body at 41 and doing back bends and flips and stuff is not something I take for granted. And even having kids, she wasn't able to have kids anymore after 26, which is when I started at 25. So that was also something that I think was a big part of shaping my life. And I danced. So really from the time I was 3, I was into ballet. And when I was in middle school and high school, I took some like abridged curriculum so that I could dance. And I was a semi-professional and then professional ballerina and modern dancer. I danced with some stints with the Kirov and a little bit with more with Washington Ballet. And then I would do some camps and stuff with like Dance Aspen, San Francisco, Royal Ballet in UK, up until I was about 15 and I had a really bad injury. I had a very devastating injury to my foot, and there was the community that I was in was really happy about that. It was a very competitive, not a very nurturing community, and my peers were happy, and that was really hard to process and something that I didn't realize hurt so bad until I came into yoga. That was hard because that just threw me off my trajectory. I really thought I was going to do something with performing arts as a career. And then it was like, wow. I went a few times and I thought, I had done yoga like as a dancer, but it was more like prescribed. And then I went to a Bikram class, funny enough.
Interesting.
It is, but it is a tried and true sequence, and it's not his sequence in all fairness. It came from his teacher. And so there was a real tangible difference within about a week, which like I said, was about 10 classes. And I mean, those classes are intense and hot. I went back to Mexico, which was where I was living at the time. And I immediately was pregnant. And I did feel like the yoga really helped, and immediately started having problems with the pregnancy. So, I was put on bed rest, and it was about almost 6 months, about 5 months later, I was allowed to come off of bed rest. And in that time period, we discovered that I had a major blood clot, a placental blood clot. And not only was it quite large, but it was also at the bottom of the placenta, which is not the best place for one to be, just based on gravity and positioning. And so I was experiencing a lot of problems. I had had a couple of doctors. I felt very failed by, to be fair, by the local medical community where I was. Although I think in general, Mexico has great medical facilities and doctors, but I just happened to have some unfortunate experiences. And I got the go-ahead to go back to work because I really needed to. I mean, I was a school teacher in Mexico making pesos with already one child. And I went back to work, and then the next day, I went to work the second day, and I told my boss, I said, I don't feel very well. I'm going to go home at lunch. And I really just felt very nauseous in a weird way. And I went home at lunch, and I rested all day, and I really just, in my heart of hearts, knew that this pregnancy wasn't, I kind of always did, but I knew that day that it wasn't going to be much longer. And I said, I remember that day just really having some moments with the baby. And that night I went into labor. I was only 18 and a half weeks pregnant. I didn't know for sure if it would be viable, but going to the hospital, I didn't feel. I was giving birth like in the car, and I really didn't, it was very scary because I didn't really know what the rates were, how likely this baby would be able to survive. But in my head, I was like, this is still too early. Like I was quite showing, I had a big belly already. And I just remember being like, I don't think, we knew it was coming, but I was like, I don't think this baby is going to survive. And my oldest, who was quite little at the time, was with us. It was the middle of the night. We're expats in a foreign country. It was a really graphic, really traumatic experience. And I think, to date, the most traumatizing thing that I've had to my body, and then also to my family, like in an emotional, personal zone, not just a physical. I just remember walking around the store one day, and I was looking at people, and I remember just like looking at individuals and being like, I wonder if you feel like you could fall on the floor and just completely cry and scream your head off, because I could do that right now and I look normal, And I just remember realizing how much, or just understanding how much pain we can all be going through and look like normal, happy, successful, young, vibrant people. And it really opened my heart to a lot more compassion for people, and really understanding that sadly, the human experience that we share is pain.
Talk a little bit about how you got into playing gong and sort of using it as part of your practice and teaching.
For me, I got into it personally. When I came to Sri Lanka, I had experienced some sound healing here and there. I had a sound bowl. I had not yet experienced a sound bath, or a gong bath, as we might call them, until I arrived in Sri Lanka. I'm doing it very slowly within the Kundalini community. So I'm working on a Kundalini level 1 certification right now, where my other yoga trainings are more in Vinyasa and Hatha, Ashtanga, and Yin. So the Kundalini community uses the sound healing a lot. I think that they are the lineage of yoga that has really brought the sound healing into sort of the yoga room and the capacity. It's always been on the fringe. So I personally was really wowed by it. But I've been followed a few bands a few hundred times around certain geographical land masses like the US. So I definitely really love sound and music. And I started doing that with this one player here, Fiona. I mean, I was literally traveling around this island to every gong bath she would offer. I, in a very inarticulate way, was understanding some of the unpatterning that was happening for me. And it came at a time in my life where I was really examining my marriage, and I was examining my job, and ultimately I was examining my narrative. This teacher ended up inviting me to a course. And so I took the course. I'd gone to a couple of courses, but they were more like workshops on the academics or the theory behind the sound healing. And even though I'm a fan of music, I am not musical. I don't have a great singing voice. And I've tried to play several instruments. It's never worked. I appreciate music. I'm not good at playing it. So I never thought that I would be able to play the gong. Then I was asked to come and participate in a workshop where we actually were learning to play and learning techniques. And I have already, at at that point been a longtime practitioner of Reiki. And I felt like it was very similar playing to giving Reiki. One of the things that Yogi Bhajan says is, you're not playing the gong's playing you, or essentially the gong's playing the room. And that has been something that's given me some confidence to go for it. And yeah, being able in some of those original trainings that I took, they were in a really safe, familiar space with people who had a lot of gong baths, and they were really complimentary and really encouraging of me to keep it up. I feel like gong is a tool that reaches people in my community or in any community that otherwise may not want to put on lycra and lay down and or work out, and it can help achieve some of the work that we're trying to do with yoga. And it's certainly a complement. Just like I don't think, a vinyasa class is going to get you to enlightenment, nor is only going to take, going to gong baths, but the two can quite complement one another. The thing with the gong is, so I play a 28-inch planetary gong. It's really beautiful. It's now what I would call my third child. It's a really interesting, powerful tool. There's two ways that the gong can work, and it goes back to some studies about 400 years ago in Europe on synchronicity and basically quantum physics. There was a scientist had pendulums on his wall, and he would sort of swipe them as he left his office every evening. So if you can imagine, he starts one, and then as he gets to the last one, the first one they're not swinging in synchronicity. And when he'd come back the next morning, they would be synchronized. And he thought this was quite interesting, but also a bit vague, because you can't tell which one is synchronizing. How do they know how do they sync? So he removed the pendulums and he put up cuckoo clocks. He set all the cuckoo clocks to different times, and I believe it's like within 30 hours, they had all synced. But he could tell how they synced because he had recorded which clock was set to what hour. It was the loudest cuckoo clock. So they all synced to the loudest or the highest or the strongest vibration. And that was a really interesting finding that led to how do we create synchronicity. So for them, they're looking at synchronicity on from more like atomic sort of behavior and molecular behavior, which we are too. As sound healers. So we're looking at, we can create this experience that syncs us as a community in a room. We sort of get calibrated together, which I'm not actually so much interested in as someone who's offering it, because I think we kind of need to go more to the source and to the root, which is ourselves. So we're looking at synchronizing on an individual level. And we're trying to, with this sound, I almost liken it to like a cellular exfoliation. The sound is so strong coming into the body that it sort of just scrubs and renews the cells. And whatever that specified cell does and whatever its regular cycle and pattern is, the premise is that it's going to do it more optimally, more efficiently, and with more collaboration of the other cells around it, synchronicity. How the gong can benefit is that physical synchronicity into the body, which if you like the gong or not, because a lot of people don't like it. And we'll kind of come into that in just one second. But if you're willing to just quote unquote suffer through it, if it's not your thing, physically, the body is going to be charged with energy, charged with vibration, which allows for a calibration and a synchronicity of your cells, which equals sort of in any platform, better health. We often will do gong after some exercise or a little bit of movement or a little bit of breath, so that sort of softening and awakening of movement or proper prana cultivation allows for a more supple body to let that sound move through. The second benefit to the gong has a little bit of user buy-in. So the gong is an instrument, but as I said already, it's playing us or me. I'm not playing it. Each individual who hears the sound has a unique sound that they hear. Perception, it's not different than anything else that we're perceiving. And what's unusual about the gong is that it's not symphonic, there's no harmony, there's no melody, there's no pattern. And as humans, we do have an innate love of music. You know, even some animals will move to a beat when they hear it, not just human animals. So even when we hear music that we're not familiar with, we have a tendency, a kind of a coded response to find the rhythm, the pattern, and move to it. And with the gong, there's no pattern. So let's just kind of pause for a second. We can kind of see that in our off the mat lives, we've implemented patterns, like we should eat at this time, we should go to bed at this time, we should finish school by this time, we should get married by this time, we should procreate by this time, buy a house, have a good job, peak at our careers, retire, da, 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 da. And a lot of the people that I work with, especially in this yoga teacher training capacity and in the sound healing, I would say are women in their like late 20s to 30s who are really questioning what the status quo is and how that's serving them, and also toying or struggling with maybe things that they do want out of that status quo that haven't come into their lives yet. So we lay down, and it's not always women, it can be men too, but that's mostly who my clients are. And we lay down and we hear this sound come in and we want to patternize it. Our brains want to predict and already live in the future. It's very difficult for the mind to create the sound image for us because it's very haphazard. And what happens is we'll experience anxiety sometimes because we're like, what is this sound? This is weird. What is she playing? Where is it going? I don't understand. My ears are essentially saying, I don't understand. That mechanism of, responding to the space between the is not able to function. And what we have two choices at that point, and it's a lot like hallucinating, if anyone has done that. I mean, there is a buy-in. Like, you can either just resist and say, like, I don't understand this, this is weird, I don't have a frame for this, or you can be like, new experience, let's see where it goes, and complete and total surrender, which is what we need to do for the gong. And when we do that, if we just focus on the gong or the sound, just focus on the sound. If the thoughts come in, they're going to come. Let them be piggybacked by another thought. Listen to the sound. Listen to the sound. Listen to the sound. And you just focus all of our consciousness into the sound. And then the sound is this really organic, uncontrolled, very personalized to you journey that satiates you, satiates your sense of sound, satiates the mind into an experience it's not implying past impressions upon. And we can come out with a sense of clarity, a sense of release, sometimes you might feel agitated, sometimes you might feel emotional, sometimes you might feel really high from it all. But it's that idea that we have to let go of an attachment or an expectation specifically to a pattern.
Do you feel like sound healing, do you feel like the experiences with this helped tie some of, you've done movement your whole life, but it helped marry some of the more spiritual intuition within yourself to the movement for you in a way that it hadn't before?
I think on a personal level, me receiving the sound, like as the receiver, yes, anything can be a distraction. So the asana for me, I think, was becoming an outlet, a distraction. I'm going to go work on my mat, like, fuck all of you. It wasn't any different at a point in my life than being like, I'm going to go to the bar and have a drink. Like, I'm going to go work out and be like really physical as a release. Now, maybe a healthier release, I don't know. It was definitely becoming a distraction. For me, the stillness of the gong and being a little bit more dedicated to focusing on just one aspect. Because in yoga, we're focusing on a lot, like physical body, breath, listening, visual, So you're just laying there, your eyes are closed. I mean, you can move around if you'd like, but you just have one job, just focus on the sound, and later perhaps unpacking what that does for your headspace. So yeah, the gong was, really pivotal for me in developing that intimacy.
Finding that intimacy with our body, connecting it to our soul through sound, is something we already do, but The gong, as Jessyca explained, is meant to create an alignment that gives us no opportunity to project what's comfortable. And it's coming to a space of being willing to sit with our discomfort so that we can grieve and heal and move through the things that have hurt us the most. If you're interested in finding out more about Jessyca's work, where she will be, retreats she's conducting, teacher trainings she's teaching, and more about Gong healing, I'll put her website and her information in the show notes, so do check it out. I hope this podcast was educational for you. I hope that you found something you could take away and that you might be more interested in another Eastern tradition that is helping people grow from difficult spaces to spaces of victory. I leave you there to live and move and have your being. Cheers.